Helen runs through the building, enters the elevator, and goes outside. Suddenly, her father jumps from the building to the ground right in front of her, and she is hit by a passing taxi. Some time later, she lies in a coma in a hospital bed. The voice asks her not to forget him, and she opens her eyes. Helen's husband Greg comes to visit her. He says that she has been in a coma for a little over a year. He promises to take her home soon, where they can become a family. Helen really did it. Give birth while she was in a coma. Greg returns with their daughter Heidi and introduces her to her mother. Helen is visited by Detective Shepard. He is trying to complete the case of her father's death. An eyewitness reported that he saw her running out of the building in trouble, and therefore he asks about her relationship with her father. She can't remember, but he asks her to call him if she remembers anything important. When Greg picks up Helen from the hospital, he admits that he had to sell their house, and now they are broke. They now live in her father's old apartment, Helen. It's really inconvenient for me to live there. While Greg puts the baby to bed, Helen looks around the apartment. Greg takes her to her father's old office, which he offers to turn into an art studio for her. Helen seems to be struggling to get close to Heidi, and her frustration forces Grego to step in. Over time, Helen begins to walk with the help of crutches and begins to put her studio in order. Memories of her childhood begin to surface. She presses the button on the answering machine and hears her father's voice. There was also a message left from a guy named Frank, an old friend of her father's. Helen goes to visit Frank, who explains that he knew her father from church, but they became estranged from each other, and he did not see him for many years before his death. Helen tells him that her father told her something the night he died, and she needs to remember it. Frank tells her that it's better to end these things. Outside, Helen sees children playing, and suddenly she sees one of them with a terrible zombie face. Her nose starts to bleed, and Frank goes to get a napkin. Helen returns home, and Greg asks where she has been. They were joined by Trisha and her medical visitor. Helen forgot about the appointment. Trisha notices that Heidi has several bruises on her leg, and Greg tells Helen that she needs to be careful. When Trisha leaves, Helen asks her about what she thinks really happened to Heidi. Trisha doesn't understand why Helen is so suspicious. Shortly after, Greg throws a homecoming party. One of the neighbors, Mr. Mulvaney, comes to talk to Helen. He holds Heidi while Helen goes to look for Grego. He talks to Monroe's father, who expresses his condolences on the death of her father. Helen asks if he knows why her father died this way. The priest says no before moving on. Frank arrives at the party, and Greg demands that she tell him why she invited him there. Later, Frank walks past the nursery, and Greg asks him why he's here. Helen overhears a conversation on the baby monitor. Frank tells Greg that his own daughter disappeared when she was younger. The next day, the Greek leaves town for a few days for work. Frank pays Helen a visit, and they talk about his daughter. Over the next few days, ghostly figures begin to appear in Helen's apartment, so she goes to the police station and talks to Detective Chopard. She asks his opinion about what happens to us when we die. She thinks her father may be trying to remind her of what he said to her the night he died. He thinks it might be. She's talking to the wrong person. Later, Helen meets with a psychic researcher named Stu and explains that she sees strange things. He conducts a seance and begins by trying to contact her father. Helen begins to feel strange, and suddenly a piercing scream is heard from the baby monitor. Helen covers her ears while Stu writes in his notebook. Then he reveals that he has written 6 names and asks if they mean anything to her. She says no, but he thinks they are lost souls who can't get to heaven. He says they are targeting her and won't be a boy, just go away. Helen sees a little girl on a bicycle and shouts. Helen goes online to find 6 names. She discovers that these are the names of 6 children missing from a town called Stoneward. Helen is going to visit the family of one of the missing children. One of the parents shows her photos that his son drew, one of which depicts someone whom the children called Sekit. Then she visits the mother of another missing girl. The day before she disappeared, she claimed that a man without a face followed her home. She was scared, so her mother made her ride a bike the next day. The mother tells Helen that she will never forget the look on the detective's face when she told her about it, as she clearly believed her. Helen then goes to visit retired Detective Gillian Burrows. Helen asks her about the disappearance of these children and asks if she has ever met the name Sackhead. Jillian says that one day she got a call from someone who never spoke, but she is convinced that it was the man the children called Sackhead the killer. Helen comes home, and Mr. Mulvaney asks if she plans to have more children, as he remembers how lonely she seemed as a girl. He tells her that he remembers how she moved there when she was 4 years old, although Helen understood that she was born in this building. Mr. Mulvaney says they moved there from Stoneward Township. Helen checks her father's papers and discovers that this is true. She calls Frank and asks how well he knew her father. She discovers that his daughter's name was also on Stu's list. Detective Shepard is on his way to the apartment. Heidi starts screaming, and while Helen is looking for her, she encounters the spirits. Helen screams, and Shepard bursts in, but all he finds is Helen crying and Heidi alone. At the train station, Shepard tells her that he has been keeping an eye on her. He tells her that she needs to talk to him, otherwise he will have to call Child Protective Services. She tries to tell him what he wants to hear, but it makes him angry. However, Helen allows her to leave with Heidi. Greg is waiting for her outside. He tells her he shouldn't have left her alone with Heidi, but after an argument, Greg tells her that he is leaving her and taking their daughter with him. While Greg is packing his things, Helen begins to see the children, one of whom puts a box in the doorway of her bedroom. She opens the box and finds a handwritten letter containing the address of her childhood home. She goes to investigate, and when ghostly children's figures appear, she starts digging in the garden. Eventually, Helen discovers the skull. The police arrive, and Shepard sits and talks to Helen. She asks how she didn't know what her father did and asks how many there were. She believes her father will get away with it, but Shepard tells her so, unless she believes in hell. Helen goes to Father Monroe for spiritual guidance. He assures her that the Bible confirms it. Don't be punished for her father's sins. She quotes the Holy Scripture to him, and he asks her why she stopped going to church. She asks why God allows so much pain and evil in the world. He believes that man is given free will, and that free will allows him to cause suffering. Helen asks if she is paying for her own sins or for the sins of her father. Monroe's father suddenly reveals that he knew about her father's sins when he confessed to him. Helen leaves in disgust. Jillian hears about the discovered bodies and asks for Helen's address, as well as to be aware of any further developments. Helen calls Stu and tells him that she needs to contact her father. He advises her, and she gets in touch with him. She tells him that she will never forgive him, and then relives the moment of his death. She finds a broken photo of her and her father on the floor, and when she opens the frame, she discovers that the photo inside is folded. And Frank is also in the picture. Greg arrives with Heidi to visit Helen, but he is killed in the garage by an unknown person. Helen arrives at the garage and gets into her car to leave just as Jillian arrives. She finds Gregor's body on the ground. His voicemail rings, and Jillian answers. Helen left him a message asking him to take Heidi to her mother's and meet her at Frank's house. Jillian discovers that Heidi has been kidnapped. Helen arrives at Frank's house and finds the door ajar. She enters and finds him. He greets her at home and reveals that she is actually his daughter Anna. Helen remembers the night her father died. He told her he wasn't her father was a murderer, but he kept quiet, and kidnapped her from Frank, who was his brother, to keep her safe. Frank apologizes for being a bad father. There is a noise coming from the next room. A shepherd receives news that a little girl has been abducted. They receive 2 calls, the first from the man who abducted her. He gave his address. Helen finds a little girl chained up in Frank's house. Looking around, she discovers that Frank has a bag on his head. Frank asks her about Hyde, and she demands to know where her daughter is. He tells her she's asking the wrong questions and hits her with her head. He asks if she can take her own life to save a life. When Helen screams, a shot rings out, and Jillian appears, shooting Frank. Jillian is taken away by the police. Detectives are still digging up bodies in the garden, but they still haven't found Heidi. Helen was taken home, and she walks around the apartment sadly. Meanwhile, Chopard receives a call and is informed that they have found Heidi alive. However, before they can tell Helen that she is making a stupid decision, just like her father in the past, we see her for the last time from the roof of her apartment building.